All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Irrational Confidence Podcast. We're talking NFL football. It's draft season. We've done a full first-round mock draft. We've given our thoughts. Fresh has dropped about 3 or 4 different articles a day, it seems like, over there on Spinable Sports. I've given you some draft cases as well. But you know what? We can give all of our expertise. It's time to bring in someone who's actually been in the war room, who's actually worked with an NFL franchise. Join the show for the second time. We're bringing back our coach, Coach Paul McCord. How you doing, Coach?
Fellas, I'm doing great, and it's good to be on the show again. I love the podcast. I love what you guys do on social, and it's a very rare breath of sports-only fresh air that I enjoy. And I'm not
happy to bring that to everybody.
I'm not blowing smoke at you, Fresh, but
We don't got to inflate his ego too much. I mean, come on.
Yeah, a little bit.
4 articles a day.
It's been impressive. Have you checked out his stuff so far?
I think it's really thorough coverage, to be honest. You could probably just go to your stuff and review it and be prepared for the draft, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Fresh is definitely the brains behind this operation.
Definitely not the beauty. Definitely, yeah. The brains are probably the more appropriate part.
So, Coach, why don't you just, for giggles right now, why don't you tell everyone, it's been about a year since we've had you on. So what's been going on? Where have you been doing right now? I know you're over there at South Florida University.
Mm-hmm.
So what else is going on?
Yeah, so my wife is the new women's lacrosse coach at South Florida University, USF, Los Toros, the Bulls. And so I'm helping her get that program started, and she hired Britt Oration, who was her assistant over at JU, did such a great job there. So just replanting the culture of lacrosse at University of South Florida. It's a really good school, and it's also got a strong athletic program as well. So really fun to see the program get started, and I love building things, whether it's small businesses or helping executives or inspiring people to be underdogs and achieve. So this has been fun, and I'm finishing up a book about underdogs. It's the 7 qualities that successful underdogs exhibit. So there's a lot. Every other team is an underdog, right? There's a favorite and an underdog. Well, I've studied underdogs that actually win, that pull the upsets and come away with several characteristics that they all share. And I want to reveal them because I've been a part of some underdog teams. So I think once you realize that as an underdog, you have a good chance to win if you do these things, it takes your mind off of if you're the most talented team or not, because only one team is the most talented, and that team doesn't always win the title.
That's a great point. It's sort of a camaraderie effect and people feeding off each other and every skill set blending together. You don't have to have the most perfect player at every position. You need people who can gel and can handle the rough minutes and the rough moments of games to keep everybody afloat, and sort of mentally tough as well as physically tough.
Yep, you need culture guys, you need glue guys, you need talent, but you don't need the most talent. You need enough talent.
Absolutely. So also, we got to talk about, before we talk draft, an amazing. So I sat back and watched it because off of your recommendation.
Yeah.
The Bullies of Baltimore, and you make a guest appearance in it.
Yeah, I have a couple cameos. Some are very, very scary for me because I'm in sensitive moments, and I'm like, what am I doing? Of course, it was like 20 years ago. So they played the sad music, and there I am in the background, like, oh my gosh, I'm ruining the scene.
So how did you know that they were making this? Talk to us a little bit about, like, what were your thoughts on it? Was it an accurate depiction? Sometimes, you're always worried that, like, when a company like ESPN or Disney or ABC or CBS or Fox or whoever gets involved with it, they might take a little liberties. They might embellish some things. Talk to us about how accurate was that?
It was extremely accurate. I have no doubts about it. I knew a little bit about it. I had heard it was for several years. I had heard there was something going on in the running. It's a little fanboyish because they do. It's almost like they're doing an interview in a theater. So if you're not a Ravens fan or appreciative of that team, you probably wouldn't enjoy it because it's really from a Raven perspective. We were kind of we had an image of the bad boys at the time, and we very much played upon that. It was us against the world, similar to like the Detroit Pistons in basketball. We were kind of like the bad boy team, and a lot of the documentary has to do with Ray Lewis and the trial that he was able to forego. I think it was well done, well produced. And I just feel like if you're a Ravens person, you'll love it. If you're not, you might think, it's a nice show, but I'm not going to watch it again.
I really liked how they portrayed Saragusa. I really thought that they did a great job on him. So, I was thinking about this as I was preparing for tonight, that I knew who Tony Saragusa was as a player. I wasn't a Ravens fan. I was a Browns fan, still am. But I never got to see the personality. I never heard him. I maybe saw him once or twice on ESPN talk there. And I wound up finding myself having moments where I was outright laughing. He's a funny guy.
Oh, a character for sure. And very seldom serious, but at the same time, very intense. So kind of a very interesting personality, larger than life personality. Someone who back then he just let stuff fly. He was saying whatever was in, there was no filter. We would say there's no filter on the Goose. And today that would get him into trouble, but back then it was a barrel of laughs.
Yeah.
And when he took it onto worked for Fox and did the on-field, broadcasting, it was a whole different kind of thing where usually sideline reporters, they do the interviews, but when he even took it, he was calling the game, color commentary from the field. I see him like hugging the goalposts on the other end of the field or walking around. He brought a whole, unique approach to that, which you've definitely seen us change in some of the sports broadcasting element that gave his personality a chance to shine.
Yeah. He's got a huge personality. My favorite Saragusa moment was in training camp at Western Maryland College. We were doing an inter-squad scrimmage, and they had defense punt safe. So he was on the field with the defense, and usually that means they take a play off, I punt the ball, and then it's down inside the 20, right? So everyone took the play off except for Goose, who rushes the A-gap as hard as he can, runs right by the personal protector, and I punt the ball. My leg's up over my head like this, and I've got Goose's shoulder pad underneath my hamstring, and I'm going back. I land on the ground, and I do a split, and I've got the Goose in a very uncomfortable situation there. And my personal protector, Jeff Kopp, who was a USC standout and had played for the Browns and the Giants, he was my personal protector. He's starting a fight with Goose at that point because, he cheap shotted me. But I was just glad, somehow I managed to, withstand 330-pound Goose, jackknifing me off the ground and landing in a split behind me. I'm still in one piece.
No dislocated hips, no pulled hamstrings, none of that stuff.
I think I was in absolute shock, to be honest.
That's incredible. That's incredible.
I was Rich Gannon before Rich Gannon.
That's awesome.
All right. Well, Coach, let's talk NFL draft here. Let's we could sit here and tell I'd love for you to just sit here and tell Raven stories for hours. So maybe that's got to maybe be another episode at some point. But let's talk about NFL draft coming into it. Real quick, talk to me. So the season ends for your coach on the staff. The season ends for you, whatever the outcome is. And then it feels like the coaching staff or whoever, you guys kind of no one knows what happens when the season ends and then you go into mini camp. So kind of can you fill in the timeline for people behind the scenes?
Yeah, sure. So let me talk about NFL coaches and scouting. There's 32 teams and there's 32 different ways to handle scouting in the offseason for coaches. Some coaches, they just check out. The season's over and their office lights go dark. So they're not scouting at all. They'll review tape if told to, but they're very seldom on the road. Then there's other teams. I'll give the Bengals as an example. The Bengals have only 5 scouts, I think, in their whole department. So every one of their coaches is hitting the road almost like a college recruiter and going to watch specific parts of the country or specific positions. So every one of their coaches is very active in the scouting realm after the season's over. There's 32 different NFL teams. There's 32 different ways that the coaching staffs manage scouting in the offseason. So I'll give you an example of a team, the Jaguars under Jack Del Rio and Shaq Harris. When we were there, we had a medium-sized scouting department. It wasn't small, it wasn't large, and so the coaches were helping out. So we were all given different people that we had to evaluate, and then we were given a position. So obviously, I had all the specialists, return guys, kickers, punters, snappers, holders. That type, not really holders, but kickers, punters, snappers, return specialists, and then I would go watch marquee receivers. And the reason we would do that is because those guys could become return guys, So, but I remember going to University of Miami to watch Andre Johnson work out and the Miami players work out, and we all thought at that time as coaches that we were going to draft Andre Johnson, that we would trade up and take Andre Johnson, and the head coach didn't have the control on that call. Shaq Harris had the call, and so he drafted Byron Leftwich with the first pick. And he didn't move up. So in that case, Shaq Harris was taking input and they were taking our opinions, but the reality was the call was going to be made by the player personnel director, general manager, and go through his scouts, go through his scouting department. So that's a typical way to do it. I would say most NFL coaches are preparing for their first mini camps, and you'll have veteran camps where some vets will come in that have signed and they'll work out, and you'll see like little small work being done with them. And then when the rookies come, you'll have a rookie camp, which is all rookies. Nowadays, what they do is they'll bring in maybe 5 or 6 rookies on a weekend tryout contract, and they'll work them out, and maybe they'll sign one of them, maybe they'll sign 2 of them, maybe none. But it gives them a chance to actually have enough players to scrimmage or do some walkthroughs and things that would require some 11 on 11. So that would be the first rookie camp. And then after that, they're going to bring the group together. So between the end of the season and the draft, there's not a whole lot for coaches to do other than evaluate the guys that they have. And I think that's super important that you have a full evaluation on your previous year's team, so that you know what you're really looking for when you go out there. Because you're going to lose some guys to free agency, other guys you want to re-sign. You want to do offer sheets. You want to do all sorts of different mechanisms to allow your team to stay intact to the greatest extent that possible. And certainly the big question mark nowadays is, how much do you pay your quarterback? You have quarterbacks getting deals that are essentially ownership stakes in the club. And when they get deals that are that big, that has huge repercussions for the rest of your roster. So I'm of the mindset, I was talking to a friend today in the NFL world, and I said, why don't they take the quarterbacks out of the salary cap and just say, salary cap, we'll keep the salary cap what it is right now with the quarterback, but we're going to take the quarterback out, and we're going to say, you want to give the quarterback a big deal? Great. You give him whatever you want, but there's a lot of risk in that because you got to pay the bills and make the money. But the quarterbacks are so important, and every NFL team should have the ability to sign or procure a top quarterback. And that really changes the game, and it allows the rest of the players to be fairly compensated and not be on a roster with a big money quarterback that's taken 30% of the cap.
Yeah, I mean it's gutting teams right now because guys are getting cut because the quarterback's getting paid, or they're getting stuff moved into roster bonuses or whatever, and it kind of feels like they're getting the short end of the stick sometimes. Kind of playing off of your discussion of looking and scouting players before the draft, you as a special teams coach, what are you looking at draft-wise for players, whether it's going to be a gunner or a kicker, punter, or receiver as a return guy? What are you looking at as an aspect of bringing that guy into the program and vouch for him on draft day to make that pick?
So first-round picks, probably doing nothing. Second-round picks, very little. Because those guys are expected to make the roster as a position player. And unless they're a safety or a corner, then we're probably not going to use their services much on teams. But third round and below, those guys are not surefire bets to be starters on week one. So finding out what are their intangibles like? Have they played special teams in college? Are they willing to play special teams? Some conscientious objectors do exist out there, and you don't want to draft them in the 4th, 5th, and 6th round because they're going to be very unhappy that they're playing special teams. So I think that's super important. I look for things like length. How long are the arms? How much ground do they cover? I don't necessarily need a 4-4 guy, but if you are longer and maybe you're a step slower, but you're longer and can use leverage in the return game, then there's a lot of value there. If you can use leverage to get off of blocks, there's a lot of value there. So looking at those defensive ends or outside linebacker types and safety types, and then I always like veteran wide receivers who have played special teams because they already know the deal. They're not trying to make the team because they're going to get 100 catches in the year. They know that they have to play special teams. They've done it before. Billy Davis was one of my favorites. He was a classic receiver in Dallas, kind of like a 3rd or 4th receiver, but he started playing special teams there. Then we got him in Baltimore, where he really helped lead our special teams. And then we brought him to Jacksonville, where he was kind of our special teams captain. So I love veteran wide receivers. I don't really look for them much in the draft for special teams.
That's a great way to put it, because I was about to say, like, kind of a piggyback. Do you see guys who raise their hand who are veteran players who want to actually play special teams? Or even like Coach, like Prime. Look at Prime, Deion Sanders. He wanted to play special teams. He didn't have to, but that was part of what made him special. Seeing the guys who actually want to take that extra, role out there and get that extra playing time, make an impact.
Yeah, Deion loved the return game, that's for sure. I don't think he was going to cover many kicks, but he loved the return game. And he was something special to watch, wasn't he?
Definitely.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this: when you're looking at let's say a returner here, a punt returner or a kick returner, is there like certain metrics that this is kind of like your break off point? Like when you look at their 40 time, does it need to be under a 4.6? Do you look at the 20-yard, like that initial step, or 10-yard shuttle, or what have you? Is there any certain metrics, like you said, okay, yeah, my eye test looks good, I saw them on paper, but then I also need to see the measurable piece?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I think every coach, the issue with coaches scouting, by the way, is every coach has something different that they fancy. Whereas a scout has a job and they're not falling in love with coaches, falling in love with players. Coaches will fall in love with players. So my cup of tea has always been vision and acceleration. So vision, acceleration, because once you get going, you're pretty much as fast as everybody else on the field in the NFL. If you're quick and can get in that 20-yard dash, you can get going. And the thing about the return specialist is it's kind of like a rolling race. You're already moving, and then you're hitting it and going. So it's not about how fast you run a 40. It's actually how fast you accelerate after you're running 8 to 10 miles an hour. So you're running, and then how quick do you get to 22 miles an hour? That's that burst when you hit that hole and hit that seam that matters so much. So watching the game film and seeing the guys that do that versus the guys that just start running as fast as they can right away, that's kind of dangerous in the NFL. You better be prepared to shift because you're going to run into a wall because everybody is as athletic as you are. It's your eyeballs that make you unique as a return specialist at that level.
I think vision, that's probably one of the most underrated skills that any player has. You can running back, receiver, quarterback, defensive back, where you see the field breaking up the way you want to, see it. You see the holes, you see the gaps, you see the place to make the play. And it looks so simple on TV, but when you're actually on the field and seeing things develop behind it, and knowing where to make the cut, where the backside's coming in, like that's huge.
Yeah, the best return specialists also very seldom get hit. You know, their mind is so quick and they see the area that they usually are down on the ground before the big collision comes, or they're usually out of bounds, or they're usually getting tackled from behind. Very seldom do they make get severely contacted. So that's another way when you watch film. If you see a college guy get lit up a few times, you know that that's not going to work.
Right. What would be one of the tests? So let's say I'm a young and up and coming coach, and you're mentoring me as a coach. What would be a great way to say, I know not getting hit, but for testing a player with the vision? Like it's easy to test speed and acceleration for like 10 times, 20 times, 40 times. What would be a great way, like someone would say, hey, this is how you can tell this guy's got great vision?
Hmm. That's a really tough one. I would like to say there's a video game you can play, but
It's
that's going to measure your ability to play the video game. Um,
true.
I think there's some drills that you can do, um, but unfortunately, there is no substitute for anything but live ammo when you're talking
Okay.
about the return game, the live ammo and the quick reactions, because I've got a play to run on my return unit. You've got a coverage that you're running. The ball and the wind and everything plays a different factor in it, the depth of the ball. So it's a lot of read and react stuff. So
Mm,
sometimes it's good to find guys that played multiple sports. Maybe they were a point guard in basketball.
I
You
didn't
know,
think of that.
that is used to seeing small holes and getting through them.
Hmm.
That's why you find a lot of what you would call reject running backs. They're too small, but they're fast enough, but they're too small to play a running back in the SEC. But you give them that return specialist identity. And, Percy Harvin's a good example from Florida years ago where, his value in the NFL truly was as an in-space return guy or a guy a quick screen and running with the ball. It wasn't running lots of pass routes. But he was a very high draft choice. I think finding those slippery guys, Wes Welker was another good example. Here's a guy who was barely making rosters as a return guy and then became a super high percentage punt and kick return guy. He just was able to find the space and get through it and get to top speed, and no one could catch him at that point. And so he was a lot of fun to watch. Dion's highlights are ridiculous, just so much vision and so much slow to fast. So these guys, give you an idea, these guys could be running 14 or 15 miles an hour with another 10 miles an hour burst for 15 yards that they're waiting to put on you. That's the remarkable change of speed and acceleration they have. Not 0 to 15, but 15 to 25. It's amazing.
Wow. Absolutely
That's
incredible.
You just never know what's left in that tank, and if you're going to get the extra burst, that's why it's more critical make that tackle or play the angle to get them out of bounds because you have no idea when they're kicking in next gear.
Yeah, no, yes, exactly right. And I had a chance to coach one of the great ones, Jermaine Lewis, and he was just every return that he had, he was one slip away from going to the house, just every single time. So it was a joy to watch him do his thing. But he used to do things like he would have two balls in his hand, and we would punt him a 5-second hang time ball, and he would toss one ball up and toss the other ball up, catch the punt, and then catch the other two balls.
Wow.
Yeah, it's hard enough to catch one of those punts, but when you're tossing two balls up and then catching those as well, that's the attentional focus that these great return specialists have. That's very unique.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely incredible. So let me ask you this. Let's going back to like the draft room. Prospects got a red flag and or maybe an issue out there. So right now there's a lot of talk about Jalen Carter out of Georgia. He's got the one major red flag people are going to talk about right now. How does that view and I'm sure there's different perspectives. One, how a coach is going to view that, how a scout's going to view that. how an owner is going to definitely view that. I think it's going to be drastically different. In your experience, if there was a character issue or maybe a possible red flag, how was that viewed in the organizations you were with?
The scouts do the most thorough job of investigating this because, quite honestly, as coaches, we may get into this evaluation phase for 6 weeks, but oftentimes the scouts are looking at these guys their freshman year in college. So they have a 2 or 3 year body of work on these guys. So we have to really rely on what the scouts have to say in terms of color coding their attitude on their draft sticker. Typically, there's a color code. There's a red that means, well, we're not going to touch them. But think of it like auto racing or performance driving. You're on a track. You better know what the different flags mean. And some teams have 5 different color codes for attitude, or character, let's say. They have, and they may have one on one side for off-field character and one on one side for performance habits or on-field character. You could have a guy who's a great off the field guy. You have a guy who's super high character off the field, but on the field, they have bad performance habits. In other words, maybe they have a terrible diet and they don't like to work out. They drink too much beer, something. But they're not getting into trouble. But they're also not. They don't have good habits. They don't have good training habits. So, and then you have the opposite. You have guys who are an exceptional on-field character and may have terrible off-field character. As Deion Sanders said, some of the defensive guys, they may come from really rough backgrounds, right? They may not have a dad around or something, and the scouts have to find out who are you relying on when times get tough. Who do you call? Because they want to make sure, because character for a young person is moldable. Unfortunately, when you turn pro, you're told that you're already made it. But we know that people are still working on their character. I mean, your whole life you're working on your character. So it's a fallacy to think that a 22-year-old guy who's made a mistake is a basket case and a lost cause. But a lot of scouts that I talk to will say sometimes the red is just too much, and there's always the domestic areas that you just don't touch. You just don't tolerate that stuff anymore. So, find somebody that you can have that has great character on the field and great character off the field. That's your guy. And then there's always the NFL owner who, he'll say, well, how good is he? How good is he? Oh, because, if he's the number one player in the draft, maybe I'll take him. There's always guys who come out and everyone talks about what's wrong with them. The Honey Badger. You remember when he came out of LSU? Honey Badger, right? He had all kinds of issues with marijuana and maybe hanging out with a bad crowd, but his on-field habits were exceptional. When he was in the football building, he was great. So he's done an amazing job with his life, like getting his ship righted. He was nominated for the Walter Payton Award. So, you can't say that a 21 or 22-year-old guy is, going to be a red flag his whole life. Like people do change. The question is it going to affect your locker room? One of my favorite takes is, would you want, if you're a scout and you're scouting somebody, if I'm scouting you, Fresh, would I want my son to wait in line for you to sign his autograph? Would I want to put you in the locker next to our star quarterback? Is your character good enough for my son to get an autograph? And do I trust you around my star quarterback? Those are questions that every scout has to ask about a potential draft choice, because, cancers kill the locker room.
Kind of playing off that, how much input do the coaches have in that draft board when it comes down to it? And if there's an argument, the coaches, do they get the say over it, or should it become like the GM and the scouts? Like, who gets that final say when you build that draft board? Because some of these considerations, like, where do you guys start splitting hairs and like, all right, I actually would take this value and this characteristic over X, and we're going to move him up the board and make him more draftable.
If your name's Bill or Andy, then you can make pretty much any call you want. Outside of that, most head coaches have a say, but it's going to be the GM that's making the call, the final call. Sometimes, though, it comes down to a general manager or a consortium, and the consortium will then say, okay, we've got these two guys. Who would you rather have? And that's when you have, the coach say, I'd rather have this guy. And then they'll take the guy the coach wants. So there is input there. One of my friends was telling me that, Gruden was notorious for like the week of the draft falling in love with the guy and like running around the building like, we got to draft this guy. We got to draft this guy. And the scouts and everyone would be like, come on, John. Like, this guy is really he's got a red flag. And John would say, yeah, but I just watched tape on him. And so he was notorious for tearing up whatever the plan was and going with like, I love this guy. I love my interview with him. And there's something to be said. Like, John was going with his gut. You would expect John Gruden to go with his gut. He wears his emotion on his sleeves, and you just know that he would do that. But imagine like you're a director of scouting and you've worked 2 years on this class, and then nope, we're going to go this way instead.
Well, it's funny you bring up Gruden because you kind of look at the current state of the Raiders. His situations, his drafting, that were all kind of head scratchers. A lot of his early top picks, and the team has been struggling. They don't have that depth there anymore, and it's kind of what you're saying is playing out in real life right now.
Yeah, and again, like if you have a head coach, and sometimes the head coach that wants the big deal and gets the big deal, they're going to have more of a say. Some head coaches, they want a head coach. They're more interested in veterans anyway. So you do have coaching staffs that'll be like, I could draft a young wide receiver, but I'd rather have a guy that's like a B-level guy, but he does everything right, so I don't have to worry about him for his rookie year. He's not going to get me fired. Because that is there's a lot of fear, right? And coaches get fired and turned over much more than scouts and personnel people. So I'm not saying it doesn't happen to scouts and personnel people, but coaches get turned over every 2 or 3 years. It's a pretty brutal lifestyle.
Have you ever heard of the story of how Cleveland came to draft Mr. Johnny Manziel?
No.
Allegedly, and this is just rumors that we've heard portrayed in a couple of books that I've read and some other episodes that I've listened to. Apparently, that was an ownership call, and he was walking into the facility, and there was a vagrant man on the side of the road who told him that, what the Browns need? They need Johnny Manziel out of Texas A&M, and then as one, and they texted, I believe, one of the quarterback coaches and saying like, "Let's wreck this town." And there's a whole other story that we'll have to tell you off air about the night the Browns drafted Manziel that Fresh will still never let me live down. But
nope.
Well, it's a lot.
Go ahead, Paul.
The scouting is a lot more art than it is science, right? This draft is more art than it is science because, if you have scientists and then you have some random guy that off the street coming in saying, no, that's not the science, Johnny Manziel is the science, then yeah, it's definitely a very imperfect process.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of the imperfect, did you ever hear rumors or see actually like a heated debate or discussion over a player in a draft room because people's ideologies of who they wanted to pick were completely opposite and they were fighting over a player? Because you hear stories of it all the time. Do you have any that pops to mind?
Yeah, really more so a lot of disappointment. You get the disappointment of, I had my guy and he called this guy instead. And you don't really necessarily hear the fight going on beforehand. It's usually, somebody's really thinks that they're going to draft someone and then the call is for someone else. And and that can then, in the postmortem, there can be words exchanged like, I thought we were going to take this guy but at the end of the day, everyone's fairly civilized in those draft rooms because you really don't know who's going to do what once they show up. Like these people have to produce, right? So, if a GM makes a call and it's not the call that you want or the call that I want, that's on them, right? It's not on me. I didn't actually draft him. I was a part of the evaluation crew. So that's something that I think the NFL coaches and scouts do a good job of, is not taking it personally.
So when the cameras are on after a pick is announced, everyone just walk around, shake hands, look energized, look excited, regardless of how you personally feel on the pick, and we'll move on with life, and we'll get this kid developed and move on from there.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at
it. In this day and age, let me ask you this: Would you be more focused on so the big conversation we've been having this draft season is over a guy like Anthony Richardson, who has an unbelievable amount of potential and is just jumping off the board as a physical specimen. But then you go back and you take a look at his college production, and it leaves a little bit to be desired, especially at a place like Florida. In this day and age, what do you think? Should I be going off of more college production? Should I be looking at what they could become?
Yeah, so production can sometimes be subjective. And what I mean by that is you can look at the numbers overall and be like, oh, this kid has good numbers or bad numbers, because you're looking at a season of work. Where production is truly measured is in big games or games against big opponents. So if Anthony Richardson has his best stats and best numbers against 1AA teams, then you just kind of got to throw those out. You really got to see what his numbers are like against maybe not Georgia and maybe not Bama, because they're at another level, but maybe LSU, maybe Auburn. Like, you want to see those head-to-head games against teams that are really good SEC teams, and see if he can lead his team to a high level. And that's the fallacy of statistics, is they can really lie. So scouts, I think, do a good job of looking through that. But sometimes draft prognosticators don't. They look at stats. This guy has 20 sacks. Well, yeah, but he had 6 sacks against Howard. Big deal. The rest of the season, he had a good number of sacks, but he wasn't a record breaker. So I think that's the important thing for a quarterback like Anthony is the scouts have been watching him for 2 years. They've seen him play and not play. They've seen his backups play. It hasn't been a smooth ride. So I think when you look at that, okay, well, it's not going to be a smooth ride wherever he goes. It's not going to be like, oh, he's an instant starter. So, yes, does he have the arm? Yep, he's got the arm. He's got the legs. He may even have the mind. But there's something about that football IQ under pressure that you have to be able to measure, and that's why you look at the best games that they played against top competition.
It's interesting you bring that up, because the 5 quarterbacks in this class, the top 5, have all played against Georgia in the past 2 years. And C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young were lights out dominant in both those games. Hendon Hooker was so-so, but Will Levis and Richardson, in both they played twice, they struggled in both matchups. That right there might be something to people more take that into account when it comes to draft day. If you see Levis and Richardson falling, that's where the proof is in the pudding.
Yeah, and some scouts will look at that fresh and go, that's exactly how we're going to look at this and rank these guys. And other scouts will say Georgia's defense was just that dominant that day. So, it just really depends on.
So it becomes more like a push?
Yeah, it's kind of someone's opinion is going to trump, right? Like, somebody in the draft room, somebody in the evaluation board is going to make that call. But that's a skirty call for a first round quarterback. To have a guy who truly didn't lead his team to victory over a top ranked team like Georgia at least once. For a quarterback at a school like Florida, which has a very colorful history. So that's very interesting. It's a great wild card. I would say he's a late first round pick, early second round pick, and I think that pick could be justified. But early first round pick, I think it's a stretch to me. Even if though he he looks great in the gym shorts and he looks great running and throwing all that. Like, I got to go back to the last couple years of how he's played.
Right. Yeah, and it's been something that I took a strong stance on early on, and we've had a lot of back and forth, whether it was like between me and Fresh and between a couple other people here, is it did concern me with Richardson. Like, I get the physical athlete, like he is, like LeBron James is they aren't many built like LeBron James, and then I went back to a guy like Terrell Pryor back in the day coming out of Ohio State. There weren't many people built 6'6", had that type of athleticism. But, when we went to Anthony Richardson, the thing that scared me, especially for a guy like him, and this isn't his fault, in my opinion, and I'll be interested to see what you think. It's if he looks really good and someone thinks, I could do something with him and I can make him into something my own. But I agree with you. To me, he's late first, early second, needs to hold a clipboard for a year, learn in the NFL, develop. And we don't do that in this day and age. But if you drafted him, let's say number 2 overall, and we all are sitting there knowing, hey, we know this guy's not to that level, but he's the one that gets labeled as a bust because of where he winds up, because he almost gets overdrafted.
Yeah, no, that's why GMs don't get a lot of sleep around the draft, and after the draft, like you're stating your professional reputation on a quarterback, and if that quarterback doesn't work out, then that's the most valuable component a franchise has.
Right.
Paul, I got another question for you. You watch tons of football, and I truly value your breakdown, your evaluation. What player or two in this draft pops on your radar as somebody who's going to has potential to be really special?
Well, and it's funny, Fresh, because I am not a huge Georgia fan. I like Georgia, but I love Georgia's defensive players. Like, I honestly do. Like, if I could take over the last 2 years Georgia's starting defense and draft all of them, you probably have one of the best defenses in the NFL, and that's rare, right? Because there's a dispersion of talent in college football, but I just find their players to be so well coached over the 2 to 3 years that they play. So I'm really very high on defensive speed there. Overall, I do like the quarterbacks that are coming out. I think having Bama's quarterback come out is huge. I think that makes a huge difference. Watching a guy with that level of character come out and that level of passion for the game. So overall, I like to see those types of leadership qualities in players when I'm thinking offense. And so, yeah, I mean, I do think Anthony Richardson is probably the third or fourth best quarterback overall, which I don't think it's going to be an early quarterback run. So those are just my opinions. And I haven't spent a whole lot of time watching pre-draft tape, because to me, I want to wait and see who drafts who, so then I can do all my research. I'm less of a pre-draft expert and more, I want to see, honestly, who fits what team, because very seldom do the teams draft the best player available. They're drafting people because they have to think about a complex salary cap equation and the players that are veterans that are moving, that could be potentially moving on. There's a lot of moving components to the NFL rosters, which make great conversation for people like you and me.
That's why we get to do what we do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's funny you brought that up, because everyone thinks, it's always best player available on the board no matter what. But sometimes need actually has to overtake best player. And it's not just need by position, it's need by how much is the cap hit going to hit us, this year? Can we invest that much money in 2 quarterbacks for this period of year? Because you start thinking, if I'm already paying a quarterback who's getting older, that 5-year run or 4-year run for that quarterback you draft in the first round, that starts carrying a heavy weight down the road. This is where the cap starts playing and really limiting decision making at some points.
Yeah, I would say fill your roster and manage your cap are the top two considerations on drafting. And drafting the best available player is probably I don't know. It's like a cliche, and I know that's like the easy go-to when people get interviewed. Well, why'd you draft him? Oh, he was the best player available. Well, nobody's really drafting the best player available. They're drafting someone that's going to fill the roster and manage the cap well. Otherwise, you're drafting someone so that you can throw someone else out of the locker room. Like, makes no sense to me. Like, if you like your locker room in general, why would you draft the best player available and cut people that you already like that are on your roster that have earned a spot that can do the job? It makes no sense to me. Fill your roster, manage your cap.
Makes sense. Makes sense to me.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Especially, I kind of I agree with you on that. It always seems weird that if you have a highly productive player and I'm drafting your what seems like your replacement or someone that is well beloved. I have a hard time too, but I know that there's so much more that goes into these things than what we're privy to.
Mm-hmm.
So, but Freshy, I've enjoyed this thoroughly. Like I'm sitting here, I've learned a bunch here, and I'm sitting here trying. I'm like, okay, what more questions can I ask here? Because I'm truly fascinated behind the scenes look here.
Well, I think that the last point about the salary cap, which Paul brought up, is people don't think about that. Like, oh, it's just tons of money and it gets moved around. But the cap hits the positions, the prime positions, left tackle, quarterback, wide receiver, corner. You start thinking down the road, defensive tackle, my cap hit, 5 years, even getting a franchise tag. How's that going to impact my number? They're thinking 5 to 6 years down the road when we're making these picks. They're not thinking because if you're making a first round pick or a second round pick, you're hoping that this player fulfills their initial contract and gets re-signed. So you're hoping you get 5 to 8 years out of a player.
That's right.
And it becomes it's a long-term deal. You're projecting out.
I mean, that's another variable, isn't it? Like, restricted free agency, franchise tags. There's so much going into it. Just look at Lamar Jackson's case right now. Like, that could swing either way. Right now, I know they just brought in OBJ because the rumor is that Lamar and he are tight, and so bringing him in is kind of a way of saying, "Look, Lamar, you should stay here. We got your guy here." I don't know if that's true. It seems like it would have some factor in because the Ravens, quite frankly, haven't gone after someone like that with a 1-year deal in forever, right? So they go get OBJ. I think that's kind of like an overture for their quarterback to stay put and to work out a long-term deal. But again, these top quarterbacks are commanding franchise level deals. But it's important. Like, so if you can get Bryce Young or CJ Stroud and you need a quarterback, you're hoping that this guy's going to be around for 8 to 10 years, but after the rookie contract, there's not a guarantee that that quarterback's going to stick. And there's always the guarantee they may not make it, right? So you kind of feel like if you're a quarterback in the draft, you're like a salmon at the start of the freshwater river swimming back upstream, But then there's a
dam. Hoping that the bear doesn't get you.
Yeah, there's a bear. Then there's a dam, and the dam, you got to figure out a way to get around the dam and get up the side, And then once you get up there, you spawn and die, Oh my gosh, I get this whole rookie contract and I can't get another deal, or I got injured, or it's such a just play the cinematic music in the background and show the salmon jump, and that's exactly what it's like being a quarterback that's a first round draft pick. But Young and Stroud to me are head and shoulders above the rest, and I loved how they performed in big games.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep, they show up.
So I actually thought of a question here, and I got to ask this one. So the old story was that at the end of a season, the quarterback, you bought a nice present for your offensive lineman for taking care of you and protecting you all season long. Does the GM, after the draft is over, does he buy okay, guys, dinner is on this card tonight, or all the scouts, you're going to show up with the Louis Vuitton luggage now? Did you ever see a GM I got to take care of my scouting department as well, like a quarterback takes care of his offensive line? Or maybe that should be a thing now.
It's funny. Scouts are kind of like assistant coaches. You get a nice Christmas gift, hopefully. And if you're getting fired, you probably get the towel. If you're getting retained, you get the VCR. Kind of like the movie Scrooged. And that's kind of the same thing with the scouts. I think most scouts are happy being relatively anonymous. And but yeah, a lot of GMs. I mean, these guys are notorious for splurging and treating their people well. And a lot of scouts have been with GMs for decades. So they have outstanding working relationships overall, and that's something that I really wish the coaching profession had, but it's just not in the nature of the profession. But a lot of scouts who I know, they've been with the same GM or the same personnel director for 10 years, 15 years, and that's really great. I'm glad they get that longevity, but they probably take the longevity over the steak dinner.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I definitely would too. I think we should move towards it though. We need to know what the GM does for the scouts at the end of every draft. That's the question you go around the table. We showed it at the end of the draft. ESPN can add another 3 hours of draft coverage of scouts unwrapping their gifts from the GM. There we go.
Yeah. So. Yeah. I mean, I guess that, everybody, when you have a draft, everyone's excited and everyone's very tepid as well. You're excited and humble. Okay, we're really excited about these guys. And then behind closed doors, you're like, well, we know this guy can't do this, or this. There's no perfect first round draft pick. All these guys have holes. Everybody's got places with dark sides, and nobody is a perfect first round draft choice. I mean, fans think they are, and they certainly are marketed that way. Well, that's what the marketing team's supposed to do, is get you excited about the draft choice. But none of these guys are perfect 10s on the card. They all have different things that they'll struggle with. It's because scouts do such a great job of breaking the whole person down in so many facets.
Well, it's a weird phenomenon when you think about it, where we got, let's say, 300 people on your board, and you have no control really about who gets taken before you. So you got to have 5 guys ready to go at the moment's notice, and then pick the best of those 5, and then let the whole thing just continue to fluctuate. It's not like signing free agents where you're the only one contacted. It's not up to you when it really comes down to it.
Think of how specialized this is, guys. Scouts will start with 3,500 guys in a class or in a draft class. And then they're going to boil it down for the draft of maybe 150, 160 guys that they would want to take, a year. And think of all the exceptional college football players who aren't even close to being on those cards.
Mm-hmm. Not even. They're getting cut from the USFL, getting cut from the XFL, and they were dominant in wherever they were playing.
And I think it's wonderful they have the opportunity to play in a developmental league and continue playing professional football, because when I was coming out, the World League basically folded, and I played in a league called the Regional Football League, which was the precursor to the XFL, and that's what got me back into the NFL. If it hadn't been for a spring football league, I wouldn't have had the film that would be relevant 4 years after I graduated college to get it back into the league. So I think it's absolutely outstanding that there's the XFL and the USFL, and I hope one of them makes it. I hope there's a spring league that makes it, because there are a lot of good football players that and without having a really good arena league, because the arena league was kind of football, but also kind of not. most people in the Arena League weren't going to make it out of the Arena League. They weren't even going to make it to a spring league. So now you don't really have that. You have whatever, lingerie football or something like that. I don't know. There's not a lot going on in terms of indoor professional football. It's more like semi-pro.
Yeah, I think that's definitely sort of collapsed with the resurgence of XFL and USFL.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
Man, who knows? Maybe The Rock will actually be a GM someday after all his what he's doing in the XFL. I thought he played a great GM on Ballers.
Yeah.
Well, it's fun when it's scripted.
Yeah, exactly. But hey, the Browns killed the draft in draft day. So listen, the draft was my Super Bowl for 20 years. For 20 years, I looked forward to the draft. The best one I can ever say is I got Joe Thomas, who wound up on a fishing trip the day he was drafted number 3 from the Browns.
So, Seth, you want Dennis Leary as your head coach, Kevin Costner as your GM, and The Rock as your owner? Is that the perfect triumvirate right there for the Browns?
Yes. Yeah, that would work.
All right,
That would work
lock
for
it
me.
in.
That worked for me. I could probably pass on Dennis Leary a little bit because I think that I'm gonna have like the almost like the Bob Knight of the NFL, like throwing like water like Gatorade things out onto the field, and CBS is gonna need the bleep button for him when he's talking to a coach. Like you won't be able to like air him talking to like an official, but Kevin Costner seems like he's got like the steady hand. I've seen him throw a perfect game in a movie, seen him, build a field in a movie. I think Kevin Costner did that, and The Rock at least will sell you on it. At least the guy can talk, and he can beat up
I agree.
every other owner. So
That's funny.
I don't know. That's what I got
Hey,
for.
you got a dream.
Hey, listen, for Cleveland fans, that's like I said, for 20 years, that draft was my Super Bowl. Crazy.
Well,
But,
Kevin Costner runs a mean ranch, so I think he'd make a good GM.
oh yeah, he would.
He's in charge of discipline out there.
Yep. Put a Dutton in charge.
Well, this has been a blast, Coach. I'm so glad we were able to make this work and have you on again, because this has been a whole lot of fun here. And I will say this, I really enjoy. I love anything that's behind the scenes. I love how things work and stuff like that. I'm a huge Disney freak, and I love watching like how they design a ride and how they make certain uh certain things work, and how Walt built animatronics and stuff like that. I love hearing behind the scenes stories on how things work. So going into the NFL, I love hearing your stories from them, and especially how things happen with the scouting departments, with GMs and stuff like that. That's just absolutely incredible.
Well, I was able to observe one of the best in Ozzie Newsome. He was one of the best personnel guys in the league, and just had a calmness about him that allowed everyone to believe that he had a plan and his plan was going to work out. And if his plan didn't work out, he would pivot and make it work another way. But he was very, very much an in charge, relaxed, person who you could trust.
Absolutely.
The exuded confidence for the franchise, and the players respected it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, well, thank you again for joining us on. We're gonna have, when the book comes out, we're gonna have to have you back on.
Yeah, well, it's in its like 4th edit now, and I think it's going to be a very good book for anyone that has a company or coaches a team or wants to know about how do some of these underdog teams do it. And one of my favorite stories in the book, and I'm not going to spoil it now, is the Miracle on Ice story. And but my contention about it is it was no miracle. And I actually break down the game before Lake Placid and the game during the Olympics against the Soviets. And I think some of the points that are made will convince you that it actually was something that was due to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
Agreed.
I love that. We're definitely going to have to check that out. I'm definitely going to have you back on. So thank you again, Coach, for coming on with us. And this has been truly awesome.
Thanks, Coach. Keep up the great things. I know you and your wife are out there turning USF into a lacrosse capital of Florida.
Yeah.
Keep making fantastic things happen, and it's going to be I'm excited to come out there and get you guys a game next season as you get your program underway.
Nice. Go Bulls. We're really excited about everything that's going on at USF right now. The school is really on an upward trajectory, and they made a couple really good hires in football and basketball recently, and there's just a lot of energy going on there right now. So it's good to be around that type of positive energy.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, I see the renderings of the on-campus facilities that are absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, no, it's a great place it's a great time to be a Bull, let's say.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Absolutely. All right, ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to another episode of the Irrational Confidence Podcast. We're part of Spinnable Sports, so make sure you're going to spinnablesports.com. Yes, that is spinnablesports.com. Like we said, there's been a boatload of articles out there lately, so make sure you check all that stuff out. Make sure you're liking, subscribing wherever you get your podcast from, whether it's Apple, Spotify, Good Pods. You know the drill, folks. I know I don't know them all. So like, subscribe wherever you go to listen to the podcast and leave us that 5-star review because Fresh and I were those 5-star prospects. Special thanks to our guest, Paul McCord, and special thanks always to our producer, Drew. Without him, none of this is possible. Guys, it's draft season, and we're here. It's going to be a fun one. Browns don't pick till 3rd round, though. And Fresh, Packers are going to take a wide receiver in the 1st round.
They will. They'll do it just to spite.
And trade Aaron Rodgers tomorrow.
Yep. With that, everybody, stay number 1 overall picks, and we'll talk to y'all later. Bye, y'all.